progress in this territory and wherever you are, we need to show up with some humility and be willing to do a lot of listening and a lot of learning from the people who have been doing this since the beginning of time. And so I just want us to hold that and think about that and remember that climate action isn't just about trying to move forward into a green recovery or a green economy. It's also about it's justice. There's been a lot of injustice done through colonialism, through our white supremacist systems, and we need to think about climate action not just in terms of green energy and wind turbines, but as it's a matter of justice. It's a matter of justice for Indigenous people. It's a matter of justice for racialized people who are disproportionately affected by climate change all around the world. And so those are the things that I'd like us to hold on to. And if you know whose land, whose territory that you are joining us from, please feel free to put it into the chat. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. So we have some really amazing humans here with us this evening. And most of them will be well known to you as climate champions in our elected office. So we have Peter Julian, who is our member of parliament in New West Burnaby, and he's joining us on Ottawa time. So he's a little later in the day than some of us on the West Coast. We also have Gurveen Dhaliwal, who is our incredible climate champion on the New West School Board. And we're so lucky Gurveen has also come and supported Babies for Climate Action in a number of ways. And we're so thrilled that she's here. And then of course, the formidable Nadine Nakagawa, who is a city councillor and a change maker in all senses of the word in New Westminster on the New Westminster City Council. And thank you, Nadine, for giving us yet another one of your evenings, as I know you are a wanted woman on all sorts of webinars these days. So just a quick word about the groups before we jump in. Jen, I'll invite Jen to talk about Babies for Climate Action.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. And just briefly, we'll talk a little bit about the group. So this group started here in New Westminster with mostly moms. There's a core group of about 5 of us that are organizing events. And we have a Facebook group as well with 100 members, mostly New West parents that are concerned about climate action. And we started about a year ago. Our first action was attending City Hall or a City Council meeting, and Nadine was actually there that night to talk about why we want urgent action on climate change. And we brought our babies. We set up a blanket and let them sort of run loose. I can just show you a picture from that meeting, and sort of occupied the space with our children. And that press coverage helped spark other groups. So now there's a group in Vancouver and North Vancouver as well, and there's more parent groups popping up around the Lower Mainland. So we have a network of parents that are pushing for action on climate change because we really are concerned about our children's future. They're not going to be old enough, frankly, to do the work that we need to do now. And the future, the kind of planet that they are going to inherit, relies on our activism today. So that's really the urgency behind this. And we want to participate in a way. We do direct action, we do provincial lobbying and federal lobbying, but we want to participate in a way that is safe and friendly for our kids as well. Like, we can go to Extinction Rebellion events, but we want to be careful not to scare our kids or not get arrested. So it's like a family-friendly version of the direct action that other groups are already participating in. But we've been a pretty strong and vocal force with a lot of fierce organizers. So that's it for now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Lila, do you want to just speak quickly to For Our Kids?
Sure. Thanks so much, Tasha. And hi, everybody. Really looking forward to this event, and I'm really glad to be here supporting this group. So For Our Kids, if you haven't heard of it, is a national network, and I'm an organizer with For Our Kids. Basically, I support parent-led, community-based groups who are involved in climate action. So all kinds of different climate action all across the country. And we work with all kinds of parent groups, including the babies group here, which really set a precedent when they had their babies at City Council. It was awesome, and we still talk about that to this day. So anyhow, great to be here. We really encourage events where parents can have direct contact with their elected officials. It's so important. And so I encourage you to make this sort of one step in that process and keep that communication and those doors open so that your voices get heard, because they're very important, they're very valuable, and they need to get heard. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Ella. And last but absolutely not least, Max, do you want to talk a little bit about the Sustainability Teens?
For sure. I'm Max. I'm from the group Sustainability Teens, which is a Vancouver-based youth-led climate organizing group. And we have recently grown a lot, so we split into regional groups. So I'm a part of the Burnaby New West Tri-Cities region. And we just planned an event in September. It was September 25th, and we went to on Hastings Street, and we had some banners and everything. We talked to some MPs. It was really great. It was correlated with the throne speech. And yeah, so we do a lot of that kind of stuff. We're the organization that planned all the big ones, the big strikes last year in Vancouver. Unfortunately, I wasn't part of the group then, but yeah, that's kind of what we do.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. And Max is going to be keeping track of the chat function. So if anybody wants to, any of our guests here tonight want to ask questions, Max will be keeping track of that and then asking our panelists for their thoughts and ideas. So feel free to pump that full, because you have a captive audience, and you can ask all the questions that you want to ask. So what this is going to look like is not dissimilar to most of the webinars that are happening these days. We'll give Peter and Gervine and Nadine a bit of a chance to talk about some of the things that they're doing. I think what our main focus is that we really want this to be a discussion of action. We want it to be action oriented. We're all on team Nadine, Gervine, and Peter. We're all preaching to the converted, or however you want to say it, singing to the choir. We're all on board. And I think what the conversation that I'd like to have is, how do we support the climate champions in our elected office? How do we support Peter? How do we support Nadine? How do we support Gervine? Because they have a lot of fantastic ideas. So we're not really here to debate policy ideas. We're not really here to poke holes in things that they're working on. We're mostly here to talk about how families can get involved, how we can take action. And like Jen said, a lot of caregivers or parents are just not willing to go up north to a blockade or risk arrest, and or protests are like always during nap time. And so what are these other ways that we can directly help influence what's happening in our community? So Peter, I will let you take it away. We'll go Peter, Gervine, and then Nadine can close us off, and then we'll have the rest of the time for questions. So Peter, take it away.
Well, thanks so much, and shout out to Babies for Climate Action. I really appreciate participating in this town hall. I'm speaking to you from the traditional and unceded territories of the Algonquin peoples here in Ottawa, and I'm just thrilled to be here with climate champions Nadine and New Westminster City Council with their 7 bold steps. I'm sure Nadine will be talking about this just after me. They've done an incredible role of leadership right across the country. And in fact, what we're seeing in New Westminster is some of the initiatives that really should go across the country. So a big shout out to the City of New Westminster, Nadine, and the City Council, and our Mayor, Jonathan Cote, and Gervine, who represents the school board, along Maya Russell, I see is on the call as well. Our school board in New Westminster has taken an initiative that very few school boards across the country have taken, and that is to work for net zero. And so we've got local government showing real leadership. And I note as well that Jennifer Whiteside, who's running for our provincial legislature, is here. So good to see you, Jennifer. And what that means is, in Westminster, I think there's a real consensus. Jennifer's a strong environmentalist. We're seeing from City Council, from School Board, that what we're seeing is some real important leadership that I think has to be replicated at the national level. And I do just mention the fact that the federal government is trying to push through a pipeline that will destroy any chance of us actually meeting the urgency of the climate emergency is something that we are fighting every day. That contradiction is something that just can't hold. And so as a community, I think we have to continue to speak out against it. I should flag that the Green New Deal that I'm going to briefly present actually comes out of consultations with youth in our community. Sustainability Teens has been doing a remarkable job, and coming out of what was a series of youth forums, I was told by young people in New Westminster and in Burnaby that what they wanted to do was see some real focus on meeting the needs, meeting the urgency of the climate emergency. Now, Doris Ma, who is on this call, is leads our outreach efforts, and I think Doris will probably leave contact information for anybody who wants to learn more about the Green New Deal initiative. So coming out of that, those youth discussions, youth forums, we established the Green New Deal for Canada. It is motion M1 before the Parliament, the #1 motion. And I think the fact that we are in a climate emergency, as we've all seen, even from just this summer, as the forests literally across western United States burned, and we saw the impacts of that even in British Columbia. The fact that this is the first motion should mean that it has the top priority. Now, I'll come back to that in just a moment. So the Green New Deal has been tabled in Canadian Parliament, as we have seen with other parliaments, of course. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tabled it in the US Congress and the House of Representatives, and we're seeing in Europe, in Asia, and in parliaments right around the world, similar Green New Deals being proposed. Now, why are we proposing it? And Jennifer's doing a great job, but if you could change the slide, that would be great. It's because of the climate emergency. The fact that, as we know, at least a dozen nations will disappear over the next 3 decades, including countries as populous as Bangladesh, if we do not resolve the climate emergency and put in place climate justice. Next slide, please. It is not just the fact that we are in this climate emergency and the impacts and the threat to cities and countries around our planet. It's also the fact that this is a public health emergency. And what we are seeing is hundreds of thousands of deaths over the course of a few years because of the government's not stepping up to deal with in an effective way with this emergency. Next slide, please. And it is also the economic costs that are taking place because of the refusal of the federal government to take the same actions that we are seeing with local government, as I mentioned, and in other jurisdictions around the world. It's now a $5 billion economic cost per year. That will rise over the next 3 decades to $50 billion a year. So when, as parliamentarians are wont to do, when they talk about the economic costs of shutting down our fossil fuel infrastructure, making that transition to clean energy, the reality is we are already paying enormous economic costs. Insurance costs are rising. And so we don't have a choice. We have to make this step towards a significant shift in how economically and how environmentally we move forward as a country. So next slide, please. We've tabled the Green New Deal. You're probably all aware that the Green New Deal principles come out of were inspired by the New Deal that came out of the Great Depression, which was an effort to shift from Depression era, from what was unbridled capitalism at the time and economic depression, to public investments that helped to establish, in many respects, the social safety net that we see today in North America, often frayed, but nonetheless existent because of the New Deal. And the Green New Deal was built out of that. The same type of societal response that takes significant and effective action. So the principles around the Green New Deal: achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, looking to create the millions of high-wage jobs that come with shifting to clean energy. We know in the United States, despite Mr. Trump, that the market for clean energy is actually going to quadruple over the next 10 years. So the market is already there if the investments take place from the national level. Ensuring prosperity and economic security for all Canadians, and promoting justice and equity as a principle, a fundamental principle of the Green New Deal. So next slide, please. So it involves a 10-year national mobilization plan, meeting 100% of the power demand through clean energy sources, upgrading our building stock across the country to achieve energy efficiency. We've had programs in the past that have been oversubscribed. Canadians have stepped up around energy efficiency programs. There's an obvious need for it, and an obvious uptake from the population. We need the federal government to show that leadership. It also includes clean public transportation, and making sure that we put in place the smart power grids across the country that are required. This is a significant investment because right now we don't have smart power grids that allow the variable types of current that come from clean energy sources. The Scandinavian countries and Germany have put together that smart grid, and we have seen clean energy absolutely flourish in those areas because of the fact that the grid and the investments were made. Ultimately, it's making Canada an international leader on climate change. The next slide, please. Now, what we've seen with regions and countries that have made this transformation, I'll note Samso, which is a major region in Denmark that I traveled to. My spouse Lee May a few years ago. What Samsø did is they started a complete transition to clean energy. They're now absolutely completely clean energy based in every sector, from home heating right through to transportation. What they did is they started with consultation at the very local level, and that's the principle around the Green New Deal. Transparent, very inclusive consultation, collaboration and partnership with frontline and vulnerable communities, starting with First Nations, Métis and Inuit peoples, working with labor unions, workers' cooperatives, civil society groups, academia, and businesses. Every region of this planet where that transformation to clean energy has taken place has started with that transparent and inclusive consultation. Canada cannot be an exception to that. In fact, that's the very basis of establishing the societal consensus that leads to a Green New Deal and a shift. Next slide, please. So it's a different way of thinking. It means ensuring democratic and participatory processes as the very heart, ensuring that all the trade rules, all of the trade agreements that we sign have strong labor and environmental protections. That's not the case today. Ensuring that we are looking to high quality union jobs and strengthening the rights of workers and honoring treaties with Indigenous peoples. Ensuring as well that public lands, waters, and oceans are protected. It is, in a very real sense, a shift to a much more cooperative, much more just, and certainly environmental conscious society. Next slide, please. So you asked earlier about how people can get involved, including Babies for Climate Action. Well, we have an e-petition that is out. We have I've traveled across British Columbia doing increasingly large town halls around the Green New Deal. It's interesting to see the public uptake and the public interest for this. Getting involved at the community level to help to foster knowledge about the Green New Deal and the importance of making this shift. Getting people to join on 350.org, which is one of the many organizations that have endorsed the Green New Deal, endorsed motion number 1, which I should mention again, comes from New Westminster Burnaby. So it comes from this community, and in another real sense, New Westminster and Burnaby are leading the country when it comes to environmental initiatives. And for folks who are not in New Westminster Burnaby or not in Burnaby South, where Jagmeet Singh is, of course, we tell people as we go across the country to contact their MP and get them on board with the Green New Deal. And the final slide is just a thank you for listening and contact information, and look forward to your questions in the discussion tonight.
Amazing. Thank you, Peter. That was exactly 10 minutes. That was the most concise, perfectly allotted politicians slideshow I've ever seen. So thank you for taking our time so literally. Yeah, we'll hold the questions. Feel free, like, as you're thinking about them. Max will be keeping track of them in the chat. If you are unfamiliar with Zoom, if you just hover at the bottom of the screen, a little chat box comes up, and you can click on that if you haven't been seeing them. But Gurveen, let's I welcome you to share whatever you're thinking.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much for having me, everyone. So I don't have a fancy PowerPoint, but I will just talk at you for a little bit. So I think in general, really the way that I see the climate crisis and a lot of what we're dealing with, just even at a board level in terms of like, what do we do and how do we engage our community is, you know, and I think we're all on the same page here, where the significant change that we're looking for isn't going to happen at a local level, but the shifts in attitudes and our approaches to how we value land and life do happen locally and are important indicators of caring and resilient communities, which I think New Westminster really is. And, you know, just to segue a little bit into that, we've seen that through the youth activism that's really happened in the last year in New Westminster. And I think that really signifies a sense of urgency, and it's, you know, it's rejecting complacency and challenging the status quo. And the youth now are in tune to inequities facing our communities more than before. And you know, it really ties well into the urgent need of political organizing and lifelong learners that we need our youth to be. And it's forcing decision makers to pay attention. So one example I'll give at a local level is last November, I believe, the school board, you know, passed a motion to work on climate action and to create a climate action plan for the school district, and also a climate literacy plan to support the science in climate change. And there was a lot of support for that. And I think that's something that's incredibly important for, you know, trustees as myself and just elected officials in general to have the support from the community, that we're not alone in what we believe and bring to the table. And it's important that you guys continue to recognize that we're accessible and that we also do need to be challenged, and that all of those things are okay. And that is how we bring change to the community. And it's also culture change in the classrooms, and how the climate strike that happened last year, it forced us to change what we value in terms of political organizing, that's an acceptable reason for students to take time out of school, and how we value student voices different as well. And I think these are really important changes as, you know, the climate crisis is forcing us to engage in different ways. And just a little update, I guess, on the work that we've been doing. I think COVID definitely presented challenges. I won't lie about that. But, you know, this pandemic also taught us the ways in which there's a lot of inequities in our schools, and we, from food insecurity to challenges with housing, challenges with the people that you live in your house, and the ways that our community needs to step up to support different areas as well. It's all a part of that conversation of how do we make a more just society and a just recovery post-COVID. But we've been working on seeing how we can make our schools better, but that's a little bit down the road just because COVID hit. But the climate literacy is very much a conversation that our teachers have started to have. They've engaged that work already in their classrooms. They've started talking about that from as young as kindergarten. And that was a major shift that we may not have seen if the pressure didn't come. So, it's the little things, but it's where we're moving towards the right direction, and I'm really thankful for that. And that's all I've got for you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gurveen. That's all you've got for us. Sometimes the best things are short and sweet, and I think that we'll be circling back to a lot of things that you just sort of touched on there, like the shift of values and attitudes that happen at the local level, and COVID highlighting inequities and sort of inviting people to rethink what they want from our government in terms of leadership and how they want people to be supported in our communities. And isn't that the perfect opportunity to start shifting some of those values and attitudes that might have been shying away from the climate emergency, for example? So we will circle back to many of those things. Nadine.
Okay, wow. I just want to say thank you, Tasha, for that lovely discussion of what territorial acknowledgements mean. I think often in events we treat them like check boxes, and they're not check boxes. And truly, if we're going to talk about climate change, climate crisis, land, environment, we have to be talking about Indigenous sovereignty at the same time. These things are interlinked in the deepest ways possible. So thank you for that contemplation. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm a settler on this land too, and just trying to continuously learn with some humility attached to that. I want to pick up on some themes of what my colleagues Gurveen and Peter said. One is, something that we've learned from COVID is that the speed of the government response can be fast if we want it to. And for too long, we've been told that, no, slow down, we're going to do, research, we're going to consult with all these people. And the fact is that people are saying, no, we don't have a lot of time on climate crisis. Like, all this has been done, just do it. And yet politicians, decision makers don't want to do it. And they find all kinds of excuses why not. But with the COVID response, I think we see how quickly the government purse can be unleashed, and what we can actually do if there is demand for it. That the status quo doesn't have to be upheld. It's been flipped on its head. Back earlier in the spring, we saw protests blocking railways because of the Wet'suwet'en issue of RCMP going into the land there. And, we are told that absolutely under no circumstances can you hold the economy hostage. And now all of a sudden the economy grinds to a halt. So again, it's about priorities. I also want to just mention something that Gurveen didn't mention, which is that the School District 40 is working on anti-racism work. And for me, the climate crisis and equity, anti-racist, addressing ableism, all these types of things are all one issue. So for myself, I refuse again to talk about climate crisis without talking about equity. If people have questioned why, for example, the City of New Westminster has passed a motion endorsing the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women report and asking our police to address the calls to action within that, it's because, again, these issues are interlinked. If they ask us why we do issues, why we talk about access and inclusivity, is because, again, these issues are interlinked. Something that the federal government just did is they just announced a plastic ban. And to be honest, I'm furious about this because people with disabilities have yelled for years about the fact that they need access to plastic straws. And we can have both these things. We cannot address climate, we cannot address environment while further marginalizing people with disabilities who are already, again, with the with the CERB, again, we saw what the rate of what we think people can live on, and people with disabilities are living far below that. So, you know, credit to Peter for his work on advocating for people with disabilities. But again, we cannot pit marginalized folks and climate and environmental issues against each other. I also want to talk a little bit about who's representing us. Too often, we see that the people who represent us don't look like our communities in any shape of the world. You know, on New Westminster City Council, I'm the only renter, yet this city is 50% renters. Along with Chinu Das, I'm the first person of color elected to the city of New Westminster, yet we have an incredibly diverse city. So again, I think representation is critically important, and having people with lived experiences coming to the table just brings these issues to life. So one of the things that we can do is we can fight like hell to get underrepresented people to the table, to the decision-making table, and then support them once they're there. We can't just drop them and say good luck with that. But we have to make sure that they are actually upholding what they said they would do and actually representing the communities that they claim to support. So just thinking about the provincial election, I'm supporting a young woman of color. She's 26-year-old, she's a climate champion. I would just encourage everybody to look into the climate champions in their community. We have Jennifer Whiteside here on the call. And I worked with her at the BC Health, when I was at the BC Health Coalition as an organizer, and she was working at HEU, working in healthcare. But again, I think looking for the climate champions in the provincial election, in the upcoming municipal election, whenever the federal election is, and fighting and supporting them to get there. These are really concrete ways that we can make a difference. I do not believe all politicians are the same. I don't. I think that there's politicians who go there to reinforce the status quo, and there's politicians who go there to rip it down. And I'm looking for people who want to rip it down. The other thing I want to talk about is public engagement. So at all levels of government, we have what I would describe as a crisis of public engagement. This is long-standing, long before COVID. We hear the most from people who are doing pretty okay, to be honest. They're doing pretty okay. And as a result, our policies tend to reflect that. We do not hear from people who are very rarely at the city, and I've worked in provincial level as well. We hear very rarely from people who are precariously housed or homeless. We hear very rarely from people who have experiences, negative experiences in the mental health system, for example. We hear very little from people who are having really concrete difficulties navigating our city. We tend to hear a lot more from people like from homeowners in our community whose issues are more related to things like traffic and parking. That's the biggest issues that come to us at City Council. And I very rarely hear from people who are fighting for us to be more radical and to do more. And the fact is, it makes a difference. It really does make a difference. If you think we're hearing like just this overwhelming chorus of voices asking us to take action on climate change, it's not true. So if you're able to send an email, if you're able to come and speak to council, if you can write an op-ed, anything that you can do really truly does make a difference, because I think often elected decision makers, they want to take radical action. They want to do what they think is right. You know, I ran for politics because I wanted to make a real difference. But if everybody's pushing you back, it's really hard to push forward when you've heard from nobody saying go forward. So really, I would just encourage you to start a letter writing campaign, send us a tweet, write to us on Facebook, whatever it is that you feel that you can do. It truly does make a difference when you can point to people saying, look, there's folks saying do more, we support it. The people who are, so the City of New Westminster has put forward a plan of 7 bold steps to address the climate crisis and to meet the IPCC numbers for 2030 and 2050. And probably the most exciting, but also the most controversial, is the one which is about taking back 10% of our road space and transitioning it to spaces for people. And that means it could be sidewalks or active transportation. It could be parks and green space. It could be anything. It could be anything. It could be basketball courts. And the number of people who are already pushing back at us because of the way that we've changed the streets around COVID is a lot. Honestly, it's a lot. And you know, if you look at social media, you know, try not to read the comments, but holy Moses, do we get slammed? And it's interesting to see who gets blamed for these things. For some reason, I seem to be the one responsible for a lot of it. I would just say that, you know, I'm not saying that we need to argue with people on social media, but I'm saying that we need to organize. We need to organize in our communities and push for the changes that we want to see, because the other side is pushing back really, really hard. They're arguing for us to maintain the status quo, which we know is leading us to, you know, Queensborough being underwater, you know, and not existing as part of our community anymore. That's not acceptable. But again, just always, always, always going at it with a decolonization lens, with an equity lens, with a disability justice lens, with an anti-racism lens. We cannot move forward to a better and more beautiful world if we're leaving the folks who are already left behind in the dust. So again, I think it's like centering those voices, lifting up others, and really, again, amplifying them. I think it's easy, again, if I go back to the straw issue, to say, yeah, ban all the plastics. But the fact is that that's going to hurt a lot of people, and we can't do that. There are other ways forward where we can bring folks with us. So I'll leave it at that, but I look forward to more of a discussion, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you to all of you, and I really appreciate sort of the wide net that you've cast over this issue, in terms of specific policies needed, all the way to, you know, requiring the work to be done in an through an anti-racist lens, and connected to other forms of justice. And I think all of those, this is exactly what we wanted when we invited you three. So you've made our dreams come true. I was seeing some questions popping up, so I'll let Max hop on here and field those to you. And I'm sure more will come, and I know I've got some too. So Max, do you want to take it away?
For sure. Okay. So the first question is from Nora, who's 5 years old. Thank you for your awesome question. So how will we make sure our whales survive?
Oh no! Oh,
a good one. It's a really good question.
That's too much for like this weary, tired mama's heart. I'll let.
If anyone has any answers, just go for it.
Peter, it's kind of federal jurisdiction, I guess, but it's up to all of us, isn't it?
Well, I briefly referenced the Trans Mountain Pipeline. One of the most egregious aspects of building this pipeline is the impact on the Salish Sea and the existing killer whale population. The environmental assessment says that they are threatened. And this is where it's unbelievable to me, inconceivable that you would have a federal government knowing that and still trying to push through this pipeline $20 billion, which would create hundreds of thousands of jobs for clean energy. So I think the first step is absolutely stopping this project. Second is actually putting in place conservation policies that provide for endangered species, including our whale population. And this is where I think all three of us and everyone on this Zoom call is on the same wavelength. It takes dramatic, significant change. We can't just keep doing same old. And we are losing on the planet one type of species every 10 minutes. You can imagine for Nora what that means when she's 20 or 25. If that continues, we need significant change.
Awesome. I have a question about that too. What do you think that you can do as an MP to try and oppose TMX?
Speak out about it. We've had people in the trees in the Burnett River watershed. I went to see them regularly. I know the city council was very supportive as well. Burnaby Mayor Mike Hurley went to visit them. So in both Burnaby and New Westminster, we have very strong progressive leadership, environmental leadership that is making a difference. I think in terms of what we can do, ultimately, we need a shift in Parliament. I think the reality is that pipeline and its accelerating costs already it's starting to percolate through the population that $20 billion is a significant amount of money for something that is going to fuel climate change. And so continuing to raise this issue and making it a extremely important part of the next federal election, I think will be part of how we stop it. Because if we have a majority of members of parliament that no longer are willing to accept the environmental and financial costs of Trans Mountain, then it is stopped. And that is my hope. We continue to work, and over the next year, year and a half, we can get a majority that is actually willing to stop the project.
Awesome. Okay, next question is for Gurveen. It's, is there an opportunity to have a BC-wide curriculum on the climate crisis?
So yes, the work has already started with the BC School Trustees Association, which is province-wide. Unfortunately, that did slow down back in April. I believe it has not come back up again, just with having to deal with back to school post-COVID. But the work for that it has already begun, and the Ministry of Education is aware of that as well. So that's active work that's happening, and we're hoping to see it soon. Yeah.
Gurveen, I have a follow-up question.
Yes.
Is that curriculum, does it go beyond, the recycle, reduce, reuse, save the earth, let's do a garbage cleanup? And does it speak to those things that, Nadine was really honing in on in terms of, the climate crisis and activism needed is a matter of justice? Is that a part of that curriculum, or are we still sort of at this, bring your to-go cup?
I think from the conversations that were had, and even stuff that we're already seeing in our district, it's very much, it moves in phases of like what is appropriate at the grade level for like K-2, and K-2 very much is the 3 Rs. And how do you boost up to that, and moving towards high school where you can engage in more justice-like conversations. So it's moving towards what's more age appropriate, but it's absolute. I mean, the 3 Rs is all what climate justice has already been in our school system. So that's a status quo. I don't think, that's definitely not what we're going for. Yeah.
Awesome. Max, I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Tasha. I remember when I was in elementary school, so I guess like 8 years, I don't know, quite a while ago. I remember there was a lot of the reduce, reuse, recycle, and not a lot of anything else. I didn't really learn about the terrible things that were happening. Like I had a vague idea from like National Geographic and stuff. I was a nerd. And so, but I never learned anything in school. And so I feel like if we can teach the young kids at a super young age, I think that'd be great. Okay, questions for all the panelists. So I guess if anybody wants to answer this one, it's, what do you take to be both effective and ineffective methods for responding to hostility in some areas to the Green New Deal policies and related initiatives?
Well, I'll start off. It's a very good question. I think what's best is people mobilizing, getting supports of local government across the country. These kinds of things make a difference, and they build. And we've had other environmental initiatives in the past. The banning of polybrominated diphenyl ethers. What it took was 200 cities standing together across the country to get that through and get the government to actually ban this very toxic product. The Green New Deal is a much greater initiative, and it will take a lot more supports across the country. So I think it's broadening the base and talking to people, having these conversations. Nadine referenced the importance of making sure that we incorporate a whole range of other struggles into one, because they are all interconnected and interrelated. And this is very important. So having those conversations help to incorporate a broader movement that can actually bring this to fruition. What doesn't help, I think, is reasoning with those who've been influenced by what is very toxic politics coming from the United States. I've noticed a difference. I'm sure Gervine and Nadine and Maya have mentioned have seen this as well, where increasingly there's kind of toxic, negative rejection of science, rejection of climate change, is creeping in to some people as they speak with us. And what we have to do, they're not people you can reason with. You just have to basically skip them and work on the vast majority of people who are actually have open hearts and open minds and are willing to hear a message of science and hear a message of hope about how we can turn things around and overcome the climate emergency. And so what I try to do is focus on the people that can influence and can help.
Because this isn't distracting at all. This is my cat, Bill. There's always one coming for any panel I'm on. I would say, yeah, I think that one of the ways that I've tried to encourage the city to talk about the work that we're doing is talking about what we gain from it. Because often I think when we think about climate change or, doing anything good, it's like, what is it going to cost us tax-wise? How is it going to make my life harder, et cetera? And I think there's an opportunity to talk about things that we're going to gain. And I think we've seen some of this in COVID, right? That I would love to have more trees because in this, in the summertime, I like to walk around in treed areas and that's lovely. I would like to have areas where I get to meet my neighbors and see their kids playing. I would like to have, cities where I can walk. Well, I mean, I do walk, but like where everyone could potentially walk or roll to get their groceries and meet their needs, like where we wouldn't have to commute for hours and hours and hours to meet the necessities of our life. I want a place where, I don't have to walk by, let's say, needles on the ground because people are actually taking care of their healthcare needs are met and that they have appropriate housing. That's a gain for all of us. It's a public safety gain for all of us. So I think framing it in that way, and I think like Peter said, yeah, not trying to bring everyone with us. I've started talking a little bit more about excluding to include. And because I think often when we say everyone welcome, everyone, this is for everyone, the fact is that we are actually always excluding people, but we just don't want to name who we're excluding or why they're being excluded because it's invisible to us. So often when we make exclusion visible, when we say, I only want to hear from renters, I only want to hear from low income folks, I only want to hear from seniors or from youth, people are like, how dare you, you're excluding me. But we are actually always excluding people. It's just that we don't see it. So again, I think we need to be more mindful about whose perspectives we need to hear and whose views on an issue actually really are going to be influential, because it's disappointing when we ask the general public for feedback and then we say, well, wasn't what we really were hoping to hear, so we're going to do it anyways. I think we need to be more targeted and intentional and take public engagement seriously so that people feel invested and that they feel like their time is and their expertise and their lived experience is well held, for the value that it is.
Okay, awesome. Next question is from Robin. They're wondering about the pipeline being pushed through the Wet'suwet'en land and how that fits in with the Green New Deal.
Okay, well, I mean, first off, the issue of free, prior, and informed consent is something that has to be the foundation of any projects that are built. Taylor Backrack, who's one of the MPs in our caucus, is very much involved in the discussions around ensuring that there is that free, prior, and informed consent coming from the hereditary chiefs in Wet'suwet'en territory. So that's something that I think we're still working through, and it's not easy, but we have to keep working until we get that right. I will say this though, in terms of any fossil fuel infrastructure, what has to happen at the federal level is eliminating what are massive oil and gas subsidies coming from the federal level. Now, there are provinces that choose to move forward or not. There are reasons for that. But the reality is, it is the federal oil and gas subsidies that allow these projects to continue to be built. And my belief is, and the part of the Green New Deal is to eliminate those oil and gas subsidies, which are in the billions of dollars, so that we can actually put those resources to building clean energy infrastructure. To make that shift is going to take resources, but the reality is right now we are spending resources that are actually helping to amplify the climate crisis, as opposed to helping us to make the shift to clean energy. So a key part of the Green New Deal is to eliminate those oil and gas subsidies. And what that'll mean over the next few years is that we won't be seeing new projects being built for the simple reason that unless they're heavily subsidized, they can't be built.
Okay, next question. I think it was actually my question. It's where could we send an op-ed? Like you were talking about how you need to hear a lot. I think it was Nadine, how you need to hear from us and how we just need to like reach out and stuff. And I want to, but I don't know where I could send that.
Yes, you could send it to the local paper, the Newest Record. I've actually had a long conversation with the editor there about diversifying their voices that they feature at their paper. And so if you write an op-ed, tell them I sent you. But also places like the Georgia Straight will also always print an op-ed. They love to hear like this perspective. The Daily Hive is somewhere that I'm going to send an op-ed into soon. The Vancouver and Sun and Province are a little bit harder, but it's not doable. So, but you know, start with the Newest Record, and I'm happy to support in trying to get that out. Like reading a proof, I would love to like help you do that. So if anyone wants to, just send me a message.
Okay, that's good because I was like, I really want to send this, but I don't know where to do it. Okay, the next question is, sorry, I just gotta find it. Okay, so the question is for Gurveen. Is there an opportunity to, oh wait, we already had this one. Oops, sorry. Okay, this is to further to Nadine's point, but it's a question for all the panelists, especially Peter from Ottawa. What's the best way to pressure politicians to act with urgency on the climate crisis, since we have limited time and resources? So we want the tactics with most of like more leverage and things like that.
Well, I'll start the Green New Deal, and this is more for folks from the rest of the country. What we found with young environmental activists is the most effective way to get MPs to sign on to the Green New Deal. We've had more than 30 so far that have endorsed it. We need to get to 150 before we can actually even envisage a vote that would get it through the House of Commons. But what's happened, and I'll give you one marked example, in the Northwest Territories, Michael McLeod, who is a Liberal MP, was visited by young activists 6 times before he finally agreed to support the Green New Deal. And what the activists did is they went to his office, they explained the Green New Deal, and then they said, are you willing to support it? And he kind of dismissed them by saying, well, not really. So they came back and they started writing letters to the newspaper, and all of that started to have an impact. He tried to kind of hedge and say, well, I'm not sure I'll be supporting it, but I'll look into it. But because they were persistent, they kept coming back. They were his constituents. Ultimately, he announced a few months ago that he was going to support the Green New Deal. So having that direct impact in other parts of the country can actually make a difference. In New Westminster and Burnaby, I would say at the local level, we've got strong environmentalists in place, provincially, federally. These are all things that we have already. But if you've got friends and family in other parts of the country, they can help put pressure so that we can actually get to the point where we can start to make the fundamental shifts that Canada needs to go through.
I think I just wanted to add on a little bit to both that question and a little bit of what Trudy mentioned in the comments about just writing letters of support to your politicians. I think that as local elected officials, we're there to serve you. But I think also recognizing that it's a challenge to do it alone as well, and to just have the support from your community is really huge. I'll just give a quick example. Like this weekend on Saturday, I did an interview with News 1130 on our anti-racism work. And by Monday night, I actually had to file a police report because, the backlash was, there's one guy that was really finding me for 3 days obsessed. And, my initial response was, I'm never going to talk about this again. And I think those are areas where politicians get really worn out. You hear a lot from opposition. Those aren't the voices we want to hear. We want to hear from people that support the work that we do. And I do think it lights a fire within us to continue to do the good work and to recognize that we're in, positions of power. This is our opportunity to do it, but we get worn out too. So that's my little take there.
I just want to say, oh my God, Garveen, I'm so sorry to hear that. That is so not okay. I can hear the emotion in your voice. I've been asked to speak a lot about racism too, as one of the few racialized people at the local government table. And every time I do it, I'm scared. And I just want to say that aloud to this group of people, that is scary. And that's just not okay. I'm so sorry, but it's important work you're doing, and so much love, so much love from across the river to you. Yeah, I'm really moved by that. I'm sorry, I'm just distracted. I wanted to say though that there's a whole group of politicians right now, I think, who play a game that I call inside outside. I don't know, people call it other names. And basically what it is that it's politicians who are really willing to organize with you. They're people who come from an organizing background. And AOC is the most famous of them, but there's also a whole range of folks across Turtle Island. And I guess it's that, yeah, Peter's right, in US, if you want climate work done, yeah, we're happy to do it. And also, I'm happy to strategize with folks about how we can make it impactful. Is it trying to take it up the chain to senior levels of government? Is it trying to do something at the local level to get more press to amplify the work that you're doing? Is it, yeah, whatever it is, I guess it's that I'm willing to be an activist with you and help you strategize on power mapping what the decision making might be. And I think there's a whole range, Christine Boyle in the city of Vancouver, Shamarki Dubois from the city of Victoria. There's a whole range, I think, of politicians who are coming in with that perspective now. So I'd say it's beyond just lobbying them to do something. It's getting them activated on your side to help them amplify your campaigns and work with you to make those campaigns the punchiest that they can be. Because sometimes it's I've thought about press conferences that dangle a politician, but then actually sub in somebody like a climate activist instead. But it might be the draw to get the media there is the politician, but then maybe we can get other voices there too. So I think just thinking about those opportunities as well, yeah, giving a co-organizing opportunity.
You guys have given some really great answers. Thank you so much. Okay, so the next one is, do you need people to write letters to council in support of the plan? Is it in danger of being revised to meet the needs of the people who are in opposition? I think this is the Green New Deal. Oh, that's my brother. Sorry.
I think that that's in reference to the 7 big steps in New West, Nadine.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's in danger of being rewritten, but I think it's in danger of being slowed down. So one of my biggest fears right now, and this is at all levels of government, is that we're moving into an austerity time. And so when I first got elected in 2018, we had progressive provincial government. We had a fairly progressive as it gets at the federal level of what we've ever had in Canada, I guess. So there was actually funding for a lot of different programs. And now I'm very fearful that we're moving into a period of austerity. And so really just wanting to continue to talk about this and name that for what it is, that we have to continue to invest in things like the arts, because that's what makes our communities livable and our lives pleasurable, and it challenges us and all these things. But also that we need to invest in the climate work now. There's opportunities to do it. The federal government does have some grants available, but there's also low I want to say rental rates for money. It's late, but yeah, low borrowing interest rates. So I think it's not that we're going to rewrite the plan. I think it's that we're going to be too slow on the plan to make it impactful. And actually, like, even what we plan to do, we need to punch, like, that wasn't even enough to me. Like, we should be doing much more. So I think it's like, I think a lot about Overton window. So if you actually push us out here, we'll probably land here. So don't push us to go somewhere that you think is reasonable, because we're going to slide back. Push us much, much further. And I think people need to continue to push us past even where we are right now.
Just following up on Nadine's comments. So in COVID-19, we had the banking sector asking for supports. They got $750 billion in liquidity supports within 4 days. And so the reality is that not only can the government act very promptly when it chooses to, it can make different choices from the choices that have been made in the pandemic. And as part of the NDP, we've had to force the government to provide supports for small businesses and for families, for people with disabilities, for seniors. And it's been a struggle every time. But the government has laid out massive amounts of money for the banking sector and for some of the most privileged people in the country. And so this is where we come to the issue of austerity that Nadine mentioned. The idea is, well, we just can't do anything about the deficit. We need to just cut back and curtail the supports that go to cities and go to people right across the country. And it simply isn't true. We lose $25 billion a year in overseas tax havens. We don't have wealth taxes, unlike other prosperous countries. And so the other way to deal with that, to change the dynamic and to put in place what's needed for the Green New Deal, is actually start taxing some of the wealthiest people in the country and some of the biggest corporations. Billionaires in this country have increased their wealth during the pandemic by $37 billion. The banking sector, not in addition to the supports they got, have had over $15 billion in profits. And yet we still have a corporate tax rate in real terms that's less than 9%, much less than what people actually pay. So we need to, as part of the Green New Deal, I think the preparation for it, start shifting to a fair tax system, having some of the most wealthy people and most profitable corporations paying their fair share. And then instead of austerity, we're actually talking about making the investments that are going to make a difference and help transition Canada towards being a world leading environmental country with the shift to clean energy. And the possibilities are all there. It just is different choices from what we've seen over the last few decades.
Okay, great. So the next question is, how is the city trying to reduce the use of single-use plastics?
So the city actually isn't, because both the province and the federal government were in a process of doing work on that. And when city of Victoria, and I think perhaps Tofino, had tried to pass a motion banning certain types of single-use plastics, it was deemed to be not within the power of our jurisdiction. So it was basically repealed, because again, the cities get powers from the province. So with the federal government coming out with this new plastic ban, I think the idea was too, is that to make it easier for businesses that are desperately struggling right now, it absolutely makes sense to me to have it be consistent across, at least across Metro Vancouver, if not across the province and across the country. And again, I would just emphasize again that we have to do it with an equity lens. And I haven't delved into it, and maybe Peter knows, but again, single-use plastics for straws. Again, I just feel like screaming, and I know people with disabilities feel like screaming about that this is a crucial need for them. So it cannot be anything that further marginalizes them. So yeah, that's where we are.
Okay. So the next question is, any plan to tax more of the wealthiest people? You touched on it a bit, but.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, we have the most profoundly unfair tax system in among industrialized countries, and that's even comparing with the United States, where the President Trump paid $750 in income tax for his first year in office. Unbelievable. We have massive loopholes, overseas tax havens, and so part of getting a more just society, part of providing the supports so that marginalized populations actually get supports that right now go to the wealthy and the richest corporations, is shifting the tax system so that wealthy people actually pay more, and putting in place a progressive tax system. We had that after the Second World War, which was the last big fight. Now, coming out of the pandemic, this has to represent a shift. And in fact, tomorrow, Jagmeet Singh will be making announcements around how the tax system has to change so that wealthy people and very profitable corporations start paying their fair share.
Definitely agree. Taxing makes me very upset. So great to hear that Robin's grade 2s and grade 1s will be on 3 hours. That's fantastic. And okay, there's one kind of question about the sustainability team, so I can touch on that a little bit. So it says, I'd love to hear from Max what the sustainability teams are up to and how we can support your organizing. Okay, so basically right now we're doing a bit of an election thing since John Horgan called the election. So we're endorsing candidates that are planning on going for the Green New Deal and things like that. And so we're kind of going around and trying to find candidates that meet our needs. And we normally don't do this sort of thing, but with the pandemic and everything piling on top of each other, we know that we definitely need the right people in office, like right now. And so we're kind of doing that. And we have a website. I'm pretty sure it's sustainabilityteams.org. I can try and send it into the chat a little later. And so that's like all of our groups, all of our regional groups together. It should talk about the different things that we're doing because different regions kind of are doing different things. And yeah, so thank you for your question. That's very nice. Okay, now gotta find the next question. Okay. Are letters more efficient than emails? I think that's for the op-eds and that sort of theme.
Yeah, and even just generally, I think people want to connect but don't know if the sort of email that goes to constituent assistants, do those go anywhere? Do emails get lost anywhere? Is a letter sort of making more of a statement than an email? What do, in terms of at all levels of government, what is your preference?
I mean, I have a hierarchy, and I'll tell you, and again, having been a constituency assistant, for me, the bottom tier is petitions. I don't personally find petitions very influential because, again, I think that it's very low barrier to signing, but also I don't know what people understand about the issue. Like often it's just like, oh, my friend wants me to sign this, sure, whatever. Next up would be like a form letter. So if you set up like an auto-generating form letter and you get a lot of them, sometimes it can be impactful, but they tend to be the same, right? So if you send me a form letter, I send you a form letter back, basically. And the most impactful, I would say, is an email, which actually is written by you with something about why you care about it. But definitely, I don't think a paper letter is definitely not better than an email. Then just like people at the city have to scan it and get it to me, and that is definitely not helpful right now. I think email is great from my perspective.
Yeah, I would say the more personalized it is, and the less manufactured it is, the better. Personal email that talks about where the person's from and why the person feels this issue is important is really the top and most effective way of corresponding. But as I mentioned, even meeting with elected officials can have a real impact, and that's where we're finding, that's where our Green New Deal campaigning is, up until the pandemic, was really focused on. Coming out of the pandemic, we hope to continue to do the same thing, to have activists meet with elected officials, in this case MPs across the country, and push them, pressure them to actually sign on to endorsing the Green New Deal.
Okay, I think we only have maybe one question left, and so that's good because it seems to be bedtime for a lot of the little ones. So for all the panelists, what do you see as some of the opportunities in the post-COVID recovery to accelerate work on climate change?
I think one piece for that is, especially for moving towards a just recovery, is how are we supporting workers who were so hardest hit by the pandemic, and how are we transitioning to green energy? How are we using the existing workforce and shifting them to where we need to go environmentally? And it's a social and green sort of, really revolution of the way that we're now doing work. And, I think post-COVID, how we do things is really, I think it's presenting us new ways of doing. So that's an opportunity I see as very viable. I don't know about the rest of you.
I completely agree. There's been an attitudinal shift, and we saw the same thing after the Second World War historically, but I'll give you just an example. We talked about wealth taxes a little bit earlier. Opinion polls now show that even about 3/4 of people who vote conservative, like the sort of anti-tax crowd, now support a wealth tax on Canadian billionaires. Now, that's a sea change from the way attitudes were even 7 or 8 months ago. So there's an opening now for people to say, because of the pandemic, people are starting to see that things don't have to be the way they've always been, that we can actually rebuild in a much more effective way. And I think that gives me some real hope that the activism we're seeing from young people and from people across the country that are concerned about the climate emergency, that will actually resonate. And I think when I see the sort of traditional politicians, and I would count the leader of the Conservative Party and the leader of the Liberal Party among them, they are hoping that they can kind of get people back to where they were, that banking sector is where we need to provide our supports, and that people just have to get by with less. We have to have austerity to address the deficit, and let's not raise taxes for anybody, especially the rich. And I think the population is somewhere else. And that gives me hope that we can keep the pressure on. There'll probably be a federal election within the next year. And I'm hoping that will lead to some substantive change in Parliament. And what that will mean is we can actually start putting the foundation in place for a recovery that is just and equitable, and at the same time helps to lay that foundation for the Green New Deal.
Yeah, I would say, similarly, I've compared it to like the Emperor's New Clothes, right? If you know that like parable, basically that like what is actually obvious to a lot of folks has been generally revealed. And one of the examples that I'll use from COVID is that austerity. So austerity means like a pulling back of funding. So it basically means like if we are investing in housing, if we're investing in infrastructure, if we're investing in arts and education, austerity means the opposite. It means we don't have money to spend. So we saw it in 2008 after the financial crisis, basically, that governments basically pull back investments. So anyways, back to my parable. I was thinking about this early on in COVID about seniors care, actually, and I think this would resonate with Jennifer, that people who workers who work with seniors in healthcare, long-term care, care aides, etc., home support, have been yelling about the crisis in seniors care since like 2001. And finally, now COVID hits and everybody's like, what is happening in seniors care? This is not acceptable for our elders to be treated this way. This is not acceptable for the workers who work in this field to be put at risk and to actually die of this. And so something that I think progressive activists have been, again, just sort of talking about for a really long time is suddenly all of a sudden on top of mind for everyone, and everyone can understand it. I would say likewise about issues in policing. Again, Black activists, Indigenous activists, activists on the downtown east side talking about like mental health and drug reform have been talking about these issues for a very long time. I never thought this would be something that we could talk about openly, is like decriminalizing police, transitioning to other forms of care, moving away from a carceral justice system. I never thought this was on our radar. And all of a sudden, oh my gosh, this is a mainstream conversation. Like my mom knows what defund the police means. Whoa. So there's a huge opportunity here. And I think likewise, for all the things climate related, we understand now how we are interrelated, and we rely on each other. We need a community. There are seniors who can't leave their houses because of COVID. They weren't leaving their houses anyways. They were already isolated. They were already struggling. There's already people who are very housing insecure and almost going to land in the streets. So again, I think these issues that a lot of people who are politically aware, who are compassionate, who are progressive thinking, we are really aware of these issues, but now the whole population is aware of them. So I think the time to capitalize on that is now, and to invest in better communities is now, and to actually invest in like massive housing supports, because it will actually save us huge amounts of money down the road. And same with climate. If we actually invest in addressing the climate crisis and preventing it, it will save us huge amounts of money, moving the people out of, I'm in a 3-story walk up in the summertime. It is already unsafely hot. With the climate crisis, people won't be able to live in this type of housing anymore. And we're going to have to find a way to help them and deal with it. That's going to be hugely expensive and hugely painful for everybody. So I think that's really what COVID has revealed for us. It's really just taking the opportunity, all of us, elected people, community activists, and community members, and really just like pushing as hard as we can to not go back to the status quo.
Thank you so much. That's really wonderful. And we're just going to wrap things up. So I'll pass things back to Tasha.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of you. And those were some really diverse questions that touched on all sorts of different things, and I was thrilled by them. I guess to end, I'm wondering, Gurveen, you spoke about elected officials getting tired and worn out and, receiving all sorts of pushback, including threats, and how daunting that is. And I think that though it's not comparable, I know that Babies for Climate Action came together originally to mobilize, but also just to have a space to talk about our climate grief and sort of this heaviness and the sadness that we carry as parents. And just looking at COVID, I know you all have spoken about some opportunities that are coming out. And then we also look at, we just went 6 months with no flights and hardly any transportation. Many people stopped, shopping a lot, or, we cut back on so many of these actions that we think would make a huge difference. And we see that we're not gonna get there. Like that wasn't enough to stop everything, and to stay in our homes still wasn't enough. So I'm just wondering if you can lend sort of, you all have been fighting this good fight for a long time. I'm wondering if you could just lend some words of wisdom to us weary parents and other folks who are joining. Just how do you maintain hope that we can actually get to where we need to go for the future generations? And yeah, how do you personally hold on to hope that we can get to where we need to be? That would be, I think, a great way to end.
I do want to say it's the youth. Like, I do think that they keep us on our toes. And I think that they're not afraid to challenge the status quo. And I think that a lot of them are braver and haven't been crushed by the system or put into a box of how they have to behave, or like what the proper and politically correct ways of doing is. And I think seeing that really shows, yeah, okay, we need to continue to support them. And, that's what I see.
I think the reason our generation is so much more into this is because we have so much easy access to the information. Like if I didn't have my social media where I could look at all these statistics super easily, like it's not even me looking them up, it's just things that pop up. And so I think if we didn't have that, I think it'd be a different story. So that's probably a bit of it. Thank you to everybody for coming. That was super amazing. Thank you, Peter Julian, for coming all the way from Ottawa. That's fantastic. And yeah, have a great night.
Nadine or Peter, do you want to just weigh in quick on that hope note?
Sure. It's younger people, younger Canadians are galvanizing and shifting the whole political spectrum. I mean, if you look at the number of people who came out for the climate strike, for climate justice, it is unbelievable, the mobilization taking place. And we're seeing other parts of the world that are making the shift. They've actually put in place their Green New Deal in places like Iceland and Denmark and Costa Rica and so many other countries. So it's both in North America, there is a more entrenched opposition, but in many parts of the planet, we're seeing already the responsible decisions being made to deal with the climate emergency. So I'm actually much more optimistic now than I was a couple of years ago, and I think we just have to continue to fight. We're at the point where people of good faith just pushing. All of these struggles coming together, we're reaching, I think, that tipping point where real change takes place. I'm very optimistic.
Yeah, I guess I would say too, like it's all of you. It's all of you. It's people who care enough to sit on Zoom on a Wednesday night. It's people who care enough to bring their babies into council chambers. You know, I just think Mother Earth is resilient. We are resilient. I just think there's so much hope in community. And yeah, it's folks who are holding me accountable, pushing me to be braver, being brave themselves. I think there is so much hope in our collective work. So I look on the screen and I see your names and faces, and I have hope. I have hope. We're doing it. This is it. This is the work, right?
This is the work.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. That's a great way to end. Thank you all. As I think Lela posted in the chat there, we'll send out a link to the recording and links to everyone's website, and you can check out more about how to support those awesome sustainability teams and everyone else. And yeah, thanks for spending your evening, and you've given me more hope. So at least for the next little while. So thanks so much for all that you do. And I feel really proud to live in New Westminster right now. So thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.